Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to We Are Kind. This is a meeting of inspiration and compassion at all times. On behalf of the Atlanta Area Council, I'd like to welcome you to today's event. My name is Alexis Richborg. I am our Senior Development Director, and we've been having these meaningful conversations since April. And this is part 4 of our virtual Scout Law series, bringing together our volunteers, our leaders, our partners, and community and business leaders to have meaningful conversations about how these times have been impacting all of us. So I am very excited to kick off by introducing our moderator for today. I'd like to introduce Doug Hooker, who is the Executive Director of the Atlanta Regional Commission, to kick off today's panel. So thank you so much, Doug.
Thank you, Alexis, and thanks to all the panelists that have joined us for today's wonderful event. And thank you to all of you in the audience. Even though I can't see you, we still appreciate that you are here with us electronically and in spirit. Before we get started on today's events, I would ask everybody, if you would, to please join me in a brief invocation for the occasion. Gracious God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the blessing of life, yet another day in this beautiful world, your creation. We thank you for this gathering of community leaders and for witnesses to just talk about and hear about kindness. In these days in which we often see chaos and disruption and confusion, we are often inclined to be fearful and therefore to only be concerned about ourselves. But in this time, more than ever, we know and you know that we need to reach out to others with acts and deeds of kindness. And so we ask that the words of these wonderful community leaders who have taken upon responsibilities of leadership to care for so many of your people here in Atlanta, we ask that their words will help to promote us to act and speak with kindness to anyone we meet in the day and in the coming weeks and months ahead. All of this, we thank you for our blessings, and we ask this in the name of your Spirit. Amen. Great. Thank you for joining me with that. So, as Alexis alluded to, the purpose of our gathering here today is to have a bunch of wonderful, important leaders from Atlanta to talk about the importance of kindness and the strength of leading with kindness as we teach our youth and others to be kind and stand up and speak up in the wake of racism and adversity. Today, we're going to hear from our panelists whose experience of talking with youth and leading organizations that serve youth about how they are navigating these conversations with the youth in their care and with their own children. We also hope to leave you with some effective strategies for talking to children about racism and the importance of being kind to others. And so now let me introduce our panelists. In no particular order, they are David Jernigan, who is the president and CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of Metro Atlanta. Lauren KOONTZ, who is the president and CEO of the YMCA of Metro Atlanta. MILTON Little, the president and CEO of United Way for Greater Atlanta. Ken Neighbors, a senior partner with McGuire Woods, the law firm of McGuire Woods, and a board member for the Atlanta Area Council of Scouts and Families First. Keith Parker, president and CEO of Goodwill of North Georgia. DEPRIEST WADDY, the CEO of Families First. And our fearless scout leader, TRACY, who's the CEO for the Atlanta Area Council of the Boy Scouts of America. Again, my name is Doug Hooker, as Alexis said, and I lead the Atlanta Regional Commission. We're hoping to also have as a panelist, he's not with us yet, but we're hoping to have Frank Fernandez, who is the CEO of the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta. And if he joins us, we'll ask him to make some remarks. But I'm going to start actually with MILTON. So Milt, if you don't mind, what are some strategies for talking to kids about racism and being kind to others?
Well, thank you, Doug, for that question, and thanks to the audience for joining us, and Tracy and Alexis, thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm going to make this real personal and talk from a body of experience I had. So I was living in New York, living in Brooklyn, actually, and my 8-year-old son and I were playing in a park right in the shadow of the Brooklyn Bridge. And he was playing with a bunch of kids his age, and suddenly one little kid looked at him, and it was a little white boy, and he screamed out, "Don't touch my ball," and he used the N-word. And the park hushed. I mean, we're in the middle of the city, and you could hear a pin drop. And I rushed over to him because he didn't know that word, and he was completely shocked. But this little boy knew the word, and he knew how to use it in context. And his mother sort of ran over to him and said, "Oh, you can't say that." And I just blurted out, "He must have learned that somewhere." And so I had to run and get my boy, and I put him on my lap. And he didn't know what the word was, but he was clearly hurt by what he heard. And I said, "Son, you got to put on your Superman uniform, because there are some things that are going to be said to you that you've just got to let bounce off, that you can't let penetrate you." That's a word that people use because they don't like you because of what you look like. They don't know you. They don't know your heart. They don't know how you behave. They don't know anything about you but what you look like, and that's enough. And you can't look at somebody and hate them because of how they look. And so this is the world in which we live in. I'm sorry you had to learn this lesson, but don't carry hate in your heart. Don't talk about anybody because of the color of their skin, and don't let anybody talk about you because of the color of your skin. Do not own what people want to put on you. I don't know how that lesson works for anybody else. It was all a father in the pain of that moment could say to a 8-year-old kid who didn't know the world and didn't know that word. And I hope that lesson offers a little bit of something to somebody in the audience. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you, Milt. That's poignant and a beautiful story. You got to put on your Superman outfit. That's a great reminder. Our next panelist to offer some thoughts is Lauren KOONTZ. And so, Lauren, I'm going to ask you to kind of reflect on the same general question, and that is, what are some of the strategies for talking to kids about racism and being kind to others? And how has the YMCA been navigating this topic with all of the youth that you all serve?
Well, thank you so much, Doug. And Milt, I just want to say what an incredible personal story. And I'm a big believer that to open people's minds, sometimes you have to soften their hearts. And I think when people hear someone's lived experience that may be so very different from their own, it allows them a glimpse into a world or an experience that they personally have not felt. And thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that. It was certainly very moving to me. You know, we have been through this pandemic as an organization trying to continue to serve the needs of our community. And we serve an incredibly diverse group of citizens, children, and families across the metro Atlanta area. And so we were able to safely run our summer day camp programs at 20 different branch locations this summer, serving 46,000 camper days. We just wrapped that up last week. And we launched the summer day camp program right around the time that the protests had begun in Atlanta in the wake of many deaths. And so we began to see something happen that was very natural, and children do not have filters. I think we all know that. If you were a parent or if you've been around children, you know that children ask very, very specific questions, and they don't have the filters that have been overlaid like we sometimes do as adults. And so we had children coming in to our day camps asking questions about what had happened. and asking about protests and asking, you know, why was this happening? And so it was a really interesting moment for us as an organization to take a step back and realize the tremendous responsibility that we had as an organization to be very thoughtful about how our counselors addressed those conversations. And so we intentionally that first week went through a training, and basically our goal was to equip our camp counselors across all of the locations that we had to be able to have thoughtful answers and dialogues with kids to help them, again, see one another with kindness and be able to use kind words in these moments. And so I'll just share a little bit about kind of what that activity looked like. And what I loved about it is it was led by our day camp counselors and it was led by them, but facilitated by some of our association-wide leadership. And so we brought them all together virtually, of course, socially distanced and virtual. And we had an opening activity where people got to know one another and shared their own personal lived experiences, much like MILTON just did. And there were some tears that happened in those moments because people were sharing in ways that they had not with their colleagues before. And it really created a great and open space to begin this work and this dialogue. We shared a video called "Sometimes You Are a Caterpillar," and it's all about how hard it is to see someone else's point of view if you are not walking in their shoes. And that really was a story that we could then take and share with the kids and give them concrete examples. We talked about how the why we live our mission of building healthy mind, body, and spirit, and we are guided by the principles that have always been at the core of who this organization is, which is caring, honesty, respect, and responsibility, and how we could incorporate activities at the start of each day of camp and throughout the day to highlight caring, honesty, respect, and responsibility, and what that means from a child's perspective and how you bring that into whatever space you're in every day. We talked about emotional intelligence and how you can get hijacked and how you can be triggered and what those moments look like and how you can use self-management to really model good behavior for the children that we're serving. And then we talked about being the change that you want to see, that all of our counselors, all of our staff members are role models, and they have to see themselves as role models. And then we ended with a food for thought video, which is, if some of you have seen it, the Run Like a Girl video. If you haven't, you should look it up. And it basically starts to ask kids, what does it look like to run like a girl? And then by the end of it, it's kind of like, wait, that's actually not very nice. And so just trying to take these child-focused videos, the Caterpillar video, the Run Like a Girl video, and empowering our counselors, many of whom are teenagers and college students, to really think about the way that they interact with children and how to model the values of caring, honesty, respect, and responsibility for kids to create a kindness among one another, so they can have, be the future that we want them to be. We did this in a 3-hour setting, and many of our counselors didn't want it to stop. And we really have committed that in all of our programs, whether it's after school programs, this is an activity that we're going to be doing with our educational coaches, with counselors, and with our full-time staff, because it was so powerful for our staff members, but really the real beneficiaries are the children that we serve. And so it was just a really amazing opportunity and experience, and it came from a very pure place. It came from truly out of the mouths of babes and wanting to be very thoughtful about how we responded to their very, very raw questions in this moment. So that's just our experience and kind of how we approached it. But it's been a journey, and one that will still be on for quite some time.
That's great, Lauren. Thank you so much. And thank you to you and your colleagues for serving honestly with kindness and compassion. Your work is not easy in these days, and I'm sure, as you said, a lot of the young people that you serve had so many questions at a time when they're feeling fearful or feeling pain or confusion. And you and your team of counselors helping them to navigate that with tools like the little Caterpillar and what is it like to run like a girl, and talking about that. I'm sure that's been very helpful for those children and their families. Next up, we're going to hear from Ken Neighbors. Ken is a, as I mentioned, he is an attorney, but more importantly for today's occasion, he's an active member of the Boy Scout Council, and also he's on the board of Families First. And so Ken, given those experiences and given your own experiences as a father, I'd like you to talk about how have you experienced talking with children about the topic of race, and then reflecting on why is it important that we teach them to speak up and out in the face of adversity.
Doug, thank you so much for that warm introduction. And by the way, just for point of clarification, I'm an emeritus board member of Families First. I cherish that role, and I'm a lifelong supporter of that organization. But with that, I will say, Doug, much like you, the most important role I play really is father. And by virtue of the philosophy my family brought to parenting, which was everybody in your vicinity is your child, I was able to extend that to the children I come into contact with as a teacher, a mentor, and to my kids. And so, in that experience and how I do it is born out of a life story, right? African-American kid from a strong African-American neighborhood in Indianapolis, Indiana, who's whisked off to the great state of New Jersey in second grade. So I split second grade between Catholic schools. One, 40% African-American, the other, I was the only African-American other than my sister. That's a shock to the system. And this is in the early 80s. And so what I bring to the table in speaking to children is you teach them by example. You are kind. You must do that. You must rise above. Number two, people like me have to tell our story. And that story is actually one of positivity and hope. Because being the new kid in town, I was embraced by a rare German Catholic in our congregation, who he and his family brought me into their warm embrace. It was, if I wasn't at my house, I was at his house, or he was at mine. He talks about my mom's chili. I talk about them having that big brown cable box with the cord still attached to the TV with 2 levels for HBO and Showtime, something I couldn't afford. And so the fact that he and his family brought me in his family has made all the difference in terms of how I outreach every time I move. And I moved every other year until I was in the 8th grade. In 8th grade, I stopped. My mom said, I'm not moving you anymore. So I had to get out of scouting. My mom was a den leader. In 2nd grade, I had to leave that behind and move over, change baseball programs, et cetera, et cetera. And the power of that one person, the ripple effect, carried me to every school where if there was someone else who was like me, African-American, I had a friend from Honduras. I had a friend who actually suffered from, he was partially blind and very disabled. And so the new kids, the so-called outcasts at the time, for whatever reason they are, we banded together. And you just need that one friend, but you also need that family to shelter all of the children from the things that were mentioned by Milton on the call, right? You know, if someone calls you by a racial epithet, you need the family around you to embrace you and to shelter you. You should not have to handle that alone. So those on the call, you need to be those stewards of the character and the reaction to breaches of character. And I will tell you, Lauren, what does running like a girl look like? So interestingly, in that same town in Morristown, New Jersey, 10 years ago, my friend tells me, you know, your dad started that team, and read here, your mom finished coaching that team because no one else would take us. Well, who were we? It was he, his older sister, an older sister of another classmate, myself, and 2 gentlemen who lived in what were the projects of the area of New Jersey, which was rare in that area. It was fairly upscale. And so we formed a team that won the championship in Little League in 1976. And we represented the true diversity and the power of that diversity in these United States of America, in the bicentennial year of the United States of America. And that is the greatest example of how you cannot let anyone define you, and you should not define anyone else other than by, you know, how they are kind to you, what they bring to the table. And if we can kind of all get out of our own way, I think that's a positive anecdote. And so with that, I'll yield.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you for sharing that life experience. And it's so much to take away from what you just said. Your mother giving you that fundamental lesson of every child in your vicinity is your child. And that reminds us all that we have to care for all of God's children, not just the ones that are part of our family structure. And then that powerful lesson of the priest who took you in when you were the stranger, and he and his family modeled for you kindness, so much so that it carried throughout the rest of your life. And that's a wonderful thing to share. Thank you very much. Next up, we're going to hear from David Jernigan. David is the CEO of the Boys and Girls Clubs, who obviously serve a very diverse group of youth here in Atlanta. But David has a long history in education prior to that. So Boys and Girls Club is kind of a continuation of his work in working with children and helping to mold them and shape them in very productive and instructive ways. So David, how have you seen events like the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent protests? How have you seen those impact the youth that you and your colleagues serve? And how are you all navigating these circumstances?
Great question. Thank you, Doug, and thanks for having me today. You know, I've learned a lot about empathy and kindness over the last 100 days. I'm about 100 days into my new role as president and CEO of the Boys and Girls Club. And as a white male who leads an organization that serves over 80% of children of color and a staff that is largely African American, it's been a powerful learning experience for me in the first 100 days. First, I would say, while being there for our kids is critical, like Lauren, what I quickly recognized during the last few months is it's been equally as important to be there for our staff so that they could be there for our kids. So I'll start with that. I'll be honest, when the murder of George Floyd happened and the protests that happened as a result, I wasn't exactly sure how to show up for my staff. I wasn't sure what I should say or what I shouldn't say. I wasn't sure how to be supportive during such a challenging time. And ultimately, I learned that even if you're not entirely sure what to say, people just need to hear from their leaders. They especially need to hear from their leaders when they're experiencing pain. And so reaching out to my staff via email to let them know that I was thinking about them and just creating a virtual space for them to be together, to process their emotions, it really went a long way with our team. I certainly didn't have answers for so many of their concerns, including those concerns, frankly, that were more internal in nature. But my leadership team and I just did a lot of listening. And ultimately, we committed to tackling some of those issues that have been barriers for our organization for some time. I mean, to be really honest, we recognized that we had to start first by owning our own stuff before we could pretend to be playing a role for our kids and advancing a racial equity agenda beyond our walls. And I know ultimately that our demonstration of kindness is going to be in our actions and not in our words. And so I've challenged my staff to hold us as a leadership team accountable to being about action and creating a more inclusive culture. Just as importantly, we agreed that we had to be there for our kids during this time. We knew we had to create a safe space for them to not only process their emotions, but more importantly, to help them drive positive change. And so back in June, we started what we called our weekly safe space virtual discussions with our teams, where they could just come together and talk about what was happening. And this was in real time as the protests were happening and everything that you could witness on the evening news. And those sessions focused on everything from helping them manage their emotions to how to help friends and family talk about racism and prejudice, practicing the 7 principles of nonviolence, healthy engagement on social media, you name it, we were trying to tackle it with our kids. But more importantly, I think from my perspective, we practiced and we try to model empathy and kindness by listening to them and supporting their efforts to be leaders in this movement to drive racial justice. And so I saw a couple of examples of this play out that really made me proud. A couple of weeks ago, several of our teams served as panelists for a national team empowerment town hall. And I just sat and listened to them as they shared their thoughts on police brutality, criminal justice reform, and the painful experiences that they, their family, their friends have faced, and what they want to do as teams to drive change, which is really what we've been trying to focus on, how to empower them to be about the change. We've seen alumni organizing protests and marches. We've seen teams starting fundraising campaigns to support other nonprofits to drive racial equity. And we've seen our kids sharing poetry and creative writing to just sort of express their emotions. We had a really powerful experience a couple of weeks ago. After about a month of working with a group of teens, they came and presented an all-staff meeting. It was a virtual all-staff meeting, all 300 employees on the line. And they shared with us, after doing a lot of research, they wanted us to focus our efforts and to help support their fundraising efforts. They researched a variety of organizations and they landed on the NAACP, and they asked us to support their efforts and started a fundraising campaign. And it was just powerful to see them have agency and have voice in driving positive change around an agenda that was so personal for them. And so that was really important. We also used this opportunity with some of our corporate partners and invited them to help support us in being a part of the positive change. We recently partnered with Willie's Mexicana Grill for an innovative initiative that's called Conversation Starter Series. And so for this, any family who purchases a taco box, they receive a conversation starter card. And we helped Willie's come up with the questions that encourages families to have conversations about race and equity and celebrating differences. And so just trying to find some creative ways to be a part of this conversation, to be a part of the positive change. So as we look ahead and you know, to be honest, we're just starting this journey, especially on some of the internal work we have to do, but we're so committed to it. We know that words are important. How we talk about our kids and talk about the communities that we serve are really important. Hiring is important. Who sits around the leadership table and the reflection of the community that we serve around our board and our leadership table is important. And so we're working on a number of things internally. And then we hope ultimately moving forward that kindness and empathy and compassion will really be at the core of how we arrive at a better place.
Thank you, David. That was very insightful. There was a lot of substantive programming that you mentioned there. But one of the things that you started out with that I think is really important to remind all of us as adults is that children don't do what we say, children do what we do. And that in order to talk to them about kindness and the importance of acting against racism, we have to be authentic and be sure that we're examining ourselves and equipping ourselves and dealing with our own emotional issues in order to best serve them and guide them. So that was great, a lot of good stuff there. So thank you so much for all of that. Next up, we're going to hear from DEPRIEST WADDY, who is the CEO of Families First. So DEPRIEST, I'm going to ask you to reflect on this question. That is, why is it important to talk to youth about what is happening in the news right now?
Well, thank you, Doug. And thank you, Tracy and Alexis and Barton, for having me with this esteemed group of panelists today and leaders. Ken Neighbors and I talked about this project some time ago, and I was thrilled to be invited. But Ken, I didn't know that you were a Catholic boy like me with Catholic roots. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and one of the things that I hearken back to as I think about kindness, quite frankly, is April 4th, 1968, which is a day that none of us will ever forget. It was the day that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And the reason why it's so personal to me, quite frankly, is because at the school that I went to, Holy Family Elementary School, my kindergarten teacher, I was 6 years old, we received a bomb threat. And so not having internet, not having TV, Mrs. Hill was her name. She herded us up under her feathers and she ushered us out to the farthest end of the playground. And I don't know how our parents were contacted because there were no cell phones at the time, but within an hour, we had somebody coming to our rescue to usher us to safety. And so it's so interesting because Mrs. Hill became a really strong pivotal figure in my family as a family friend. And I actually eulogized her about 6 years ago when she turned 95. She worked until she was 90. And she sent several kids to national spelling bees in her later years, and 3 of them won the National Spelling Bee Championship. But when she turned 80, a group of us and our classmates, we got together and we had a big celebration for her when she retired. And we looked at Robert Fulcrum's book, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And we use that as the backdrop of our celebration for Mrs. Hill. And some of these lessons that we learn as kids are lessons that we teach our kids today. And I will tell you, as we as adults across the nation have regurgitated our desperate selves all over the world, I think we've forgotten some of these key principles that we learned in kindergarten. For instance, we were told to hold hands and stick together. Say please and thank you. Sticks and stones may break our bones, but words break our hearts. Share your toys. Peace is not something you wish for, it's something you must make. So I would tell my kids and my grandkids as they get older, not only lead, because oftentimes kindness could be misconstrued for weakness. So if you're gonna lead, lead in kindness. We have a young man, a new friend of mine, 8 years old, Miles Garrett. He and his parents, his dad Thaddeus, they took it upon themselves. Miles did some research, and he and his dad did a drive for Families First, unbeknownst to us, quite frankly. We didn't know about it until we were told about the donation of food and hygiene products and clothing for some of our women in our group home who have been trafficked and are now parents. And they galvanized a truckload of gear and distributed it to us for our families. And this is a clear example of Miles knowing at 8 years old how to lead in kindness. And it's so interesting. And I thank Miles and his dad for that project. We're gonna be celebrating that this Sunday on the news. We're gonna be giving Miles some attention through one of the news stations. I also want to end by saying congratulations to Mr. Louis Frank. He was a car hop at the varsity. You may have seen that on the news. He was a car hop for 63 years. And he said that to get along with people, you got to love them and you got to respect them. Thanks again, gang.
Thank you very much, DEPRIEST. That was great. I love all of those stories, but the story of Mrs. Hill, who affected you at such an early age, and you and your classmates and those that came after you, and who gave you a lifetime of leadership by her own example. And then to hear about the young 8-year-old Miles Garrett leading with kindness at a young age. And that's a reminder to all of us on the panel and listening that leadership is not age specific. Leadership comes at all ages, and leading with kindness. And children are some of the best at showing us how to do that. We just have to learn how to follow kindness in leaders when we see it and model it and reflect it ourselves. So thank you, DEPRIEST. That was great. Now we're going to hear from Mr. Keith Parker. Keith is the CEO of Goodwill of North Georgia. And Keith, if you would reflect on how can we as parents and as leaders model these behaviors to children on a continuing basis, not just an episodic time, but continually. How can we find it within ourselves to do that?
Well, what they see is what they'll be. Now, that's the way a president of an organization I used to belong to back in Charlotte 20 years ago started off every meeting and ended every meeting. And let me thank Tracy, Alexis, you, Doug, for moderating this panel, for having me and the rest of us here this afternoon. But I think about Charlotte as well, about a story, and I tell this to my kids all the time, that I had just arrived to the city 3 or 4 months and had put together, to that time, the biggest deal I've ever been involved in. And so to consummate the deal, we were at the Bank of America headquarters building in the penthouse suite. And literally, you know, you're in the penthouse suite of the Bank of America building there. The building sways a little bit because you're in rare air. And we had the $10 cookies, the true wine and cheese crowd, the CEO of Bank of America, Wachovia, all of these VIP level folks. So I get up, do my presentation, it passes, and this multi-million-dollar deal is consummated. So that's how I started that afternoon. Later that same day, that I was working for the Transit Authority. Later that same day, we had a meeting with a group of brain injury survivors. And the meeting was actually held in an old dilapidated gym. And folks came in, some brought cookies, some had some chips, others had some soda. And they wanted to talk about, and basically just telling me, please don't raise the bus fare and don't cut our routes. Because if you do that, it's lifeline to us, and it has enormously negative implications if you cut that. And so we sat for 2.5 hours and listened to story after story about how important the transit system was to all those folks, to the folks who use the system, their families, their caregivers. And in that moment, I thought about that whole day and how, and to paraphrase Kipling, when you can walk with kings, but not lose the common touch, you'll be a man, my son. And that is the lesson I try to teach my children all the time, that it's very important to be able to look eye to eye with the Fortune 500 executive, but just as important, if not more important, to look eye to eye and actually even look up to the person whose path may be a little bit more difficult. So the reason why I left, people ask me very often why I left the public transit world and moved over to the nonprofit side of things, and why I love Goodwill so much, is because Goodwill does two things. First, their mission is just so pure, of putting people to work and meeting people where they are. And then the second component of that is doing it in such a meaningful way to move the needle. And we try to model, in my leadership, I try to model what I do at work with the exact same way I do it at home. At the Goodwill offices, we have no tolerance for the intolerant. So there are no jokes about Hispanic people. There are no gay jokes. There are no disparaging comments about women. There are no expectation that if we're having a meeting that the women set up do all the so-called tasks that have been gender specific for so long. And in my household, that's the same way as well. That my wife looks me eye to eye, and again, quite often I'm looking up when we're having discussions. And we try to mimic the 5 lessons my dad gave me. Work hard, be humble, respect women, carry yourself with dignity, and be nice. If you can do those 5 things, just about everything else will work itself out. You know, the one final thing I'll mention, and it's about the whole modeling behavior component. And to get back to where I started, what they see is what they'll be. In the last 10 days, in my house, you know, in our house, we've had visitors from Eastern Europe, Russian descent, Hispanic backgrounds, white families, African-American families, and then as a constant visitor, one of my son's best friends, who is a young man on the autism spectrum who has some special needs. And the reason why I think that's so important is that if our kids see us open the door and say we are welcoming, then they will open doors and be welcoming. It's easy to talk about being committed to diversity, but it takes a little bit more work and commitment to actually live it. So again, I'll end the way I started. What they see is what they'll be. And thank you, Tracy and Alexis and Doug, for giving us the opportunity to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you, Keith. That's powerful. What they see is what they will be. And thank you for opening up and sharing stories about your own personal experience with your family and your professional experience. I love so much of that, but in particular, I love the reminder that we need to look everybody in the eye with respect and courtesy, and to listen always, regardless of what people's backgrounds and circumstances are, because listening and listening authentically too is an act of kindness, along with the other great things you said. So thank you so much for sharing that. In our audience, I just want to say, ladies and gentlemen, we've been fortunate that Frank Fernandez has been able to join us. And so I'm going to offer Frank a question and give him a chance to reflect as well. Frank, as I mentioned before, is the CEO of the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta. And Frank, if you would just reflect on the question of why it is important to talk to youth about what is happening in the news and having conversations at this time in the history of our country.
Great. Thank you, Doug. Doug, I appreciate that. Happy Friday, everybody. And Tracy, I don't know if when we spoke, my son was a Boy Scout, and I did several Eskimo, I think it's called Eskimo scouting trips, where you sleep outside below 32. So that's what I always remember and associate with the Boy Scouts, is sleeping out in the cold with my son with the Boy Scouts. In preparing for today's session, the title is is important, and it made me think of this quote, from Micah, in terms of what does God require of you, but to do justice, love kindness, to walk humbly with your God. And I think that those themes have been touched on throughout everyone's remarks. And so you've heard a lot about the different dimensions of kindness. And what I like to focus on, based on the question that Doug asked, is just this idea. It's one of my mantras for this year, is that directness is kindness. And why I think it's so important to talk to youth during this time is for that reason, and really break it down to three basic things for me, which is, I'm going to use my own children. I have a 19-year-old, a boy, and a 17-year-old girl now. And kind of my own conversations with them today, as well as in the past, as things have evolved and different issues have come up. The first big one, in terms of why it's important to talk to youth, is that they need help processing, right? We're in this middle, 2020, I was just on a couple meetings or Zoom calls earlier, where everyone was reiterating this notion that 2020 is like no year other. Right? There is just so many crazy things happening in this world as it relates to the pandemic, and then processing this racial injustice, unrest, in this particular kind of singular moment in history. And for kids, depending on the age, this could be a very, very scary thing, right? And I hearken back with my daughter, especially, who's younger, and not to get political, but when 2016 happened, she woke up the next morning and she was crying because she thought a lot of our family was going to get deported. And having to sit down and have a conversation with her to kind of talk through what it means and what it doesn't mean. But kids don't have those filters to understand that. And so to me, especially in today's moment, where they get so much information thrown at them, right, through social media and all these other sources, and they don't have all the right filters to be really able to process and contextualize all this information. So whether you talk to them or not, they're getting that information. So it really behooves us to talk to them to help process that, because it's scary, right? Another thing that I think is a reason why it's important to help them process is because they are figuring out what their worldview is, right? They're figuring out what they think and what they're seeing and hearing. What does that mean about what the world is and my place in it, right? And I think, to me, fast forwarding to today, we in my house at the dinner table have a lot of these conversations. My kids are very politically active and have questions for us, and I see them visibly figuring out what it is that they believe and think as they're talking to us. And so it's really important to have a good, constructive conversation with them about these issues, and for our household, just really push them on why they think what they think and what the rationale is, and really making sure they understand that, right? And how much is grounded in their own experience, how much is grounded in what they've been taught and what their principles are. So that dialogue and helping them process is really important. The second reason I think it's really important to talk to youth is they need to know that adults are human, right? They need to know we do them a disservice if we don't let them know that there are a lot of really great adults out there, and there are a lot of great things that adults do, but then there are some things that aren't so great, and that includes ourselves as parents. And so we need to engage with them on these issues and have those kinds of conversations so that they understand that, because as parents, we're definitely imperfect, and there are a lot of folks out there that are imperfect. And connected to that, and I think Ken mentioned this in terms of we need to create that safe space for them so that to process and do all these things, but we also know that the world is not going to shelter them, right? That they need to understand the challenges that are out there and the real issues that we're still grappling with, so that they, again, can start thinking about that and processing it and developing that, both that emotional and spiritual and intellectual fortitude to be able to engage and deal with that in the world. And then lastly, the other thing that's really, and this is as I get older, becomes more and more apparent to me, is that it is youth that are the leaders of these moments and these movements, right? I always keep getting back to it, especially as I get further and further away from the age that Martin Luther King was when he gave the I Have a Dream speech. And I think, oh my God, he was a kid. But it was, he wasn't, but he was a young man, and he had started that way back when he was like my kid's age. And even the great John Lewis, who just passed, he was my son's age when he was leading all these movements. And so to me, that's another reason why, because they are the ones who are going to be the leaders of these things. And so we need to engage with them, because they're the ones who don't get caught up in our hangups, right? They're the ones who are going to be able to lead. And the other thing I think it's really important to talk to youth about this stuff is that they also have a way of getting around adults' hangups and adults' walls and biases and kind of pushing us in our thinking. And I've seen it happen multiple times with my kids and pushing me in my thinking and how I think about like some of the things they share. I'm like, I have no idea what you guys are talking about, because they're my kids. So I engage with them on these issues. And I see that with my kids in terms of how they push my parents and my wife's parents in terms of how they think, and can do that in a way that I don't get, with your own parents, you get caught up in stuff, but these kids are able to do that. And so for all these reasons, I think, directness is kindness, and really teasing out the importance of kindness in all its facets is critical. And so I really encourage all of you who are on this call to really engage with youth, whether they're your own children or just youth that you have interaction with, on these issues of the day, because they are processing it and they need adult support to think through what it means and what it means for them and how they are going to respond to that. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you. So glad you could join us and share that wonderful perspective. And that was really, really a good reminder for us that, reminding young people, youth, that we're not perfect as adults, even their parents, we're not perfect. And there's things that we want to teach them, but there's things that we can learn from them, and learning how we can support them, engaging with them to have them feel empowered, because as you say, they will often get around some of the biases and walls that we try to throw up. And so that is wonderful. That's wonderful. Our last speaker for the afternoon's event, certainly not the least, is our Scout leader here in Atlanta, a gentleman for whom I have a great deal of respect and admiration, TRACY TECHAU. So TRACY, I'm going to ask, if you will, to share a little thoughts about the topic we've had today. And I also want to say thank you and Alexis and your team for putting on this incredible program and putting together this tremendous panel of community leaders. So TRACY.
Doug, thank you. And I would also like to echo your appreciation for Alexis Richburg, a member of our leadership team who conceived this idea and has been a driving force in this, our fourth of a series of the Scout Law and the ideals that were founded in 1910 that makes a better society. And Frank referenced Dr. King and his incredible impact on the world. And Atlanta can take pride that Dr. King was one of our own and from Atlanta. And we take a special pride that Dr. King was a Boy Scout with a troop in Ebenezer Baptist Church back 70 years ago. And Dr. King said the Scout Oath and said the Scout Law. And there's 12 laws, and I'll just say the first 6, and it's trustworthy and loyal, helpful, courteous, friendly, kind, and kind is what we're talking about today. And kindness is one of the most powerful laws in scouting. If you think about it, if everyone was kind, truly fundamentally kind, there would be no place for racism. There would be no place for ageism. There would be no place for treating someone poorly because of a difference with your own person, because it's unkind. So a Scout is kind has been a mantra in the Boy Scouts of America for 110 years, and it will continue to shape the lives of the 30,000 scouts that we serve in Atlanta and the generations that we will serve for the future. We all know that leaders, as parents, as citizens of our nation, that we must do the work to bring about a better, more just community right now. We cannot wait. We need to do our work now. But we must also prepare the next generation, the generation that will replace us in the roles that we have as leaders and as parents and as neighbors and as citizens. And that's why we're so committed and we're so passionate about the scouting program. We know that we're doing our work today, but we know that we're planting the seeds of the mighty oak trees that will tower strong for the next generations and make sure that Atlanta's love and its care for each other, what's special that makes Atlanta special, will continue well beyond us, well beyond the values that we're living, but those values will be timeless. And it's our responsibility, again, as parents, as leaders, as CEOs, to change this community, this generation, and forever. So I'll close with a challenge to all of our guests, is to be kind. Think about today, this beautiful Friday, this beautiful weekend that we have coming up, and ask yourself each moment, am I being as kind as I can possibly be today, right now? And challenge yourself. I'd like to thank our panelists. This has been so much fun putting this group together. Many of our panelists have been lifelong scouting supporters. Some we're just getting to know better today, and we're so excited to support the missions of these incredible, iconic organizations that have been kind and joined us today. So thank you all, and thank you for joining. Back to you, Doug.
Thank you, Tracy. And thanks once again to all the panelists, my fellow community leaders who offered so many great stories and thoughts and vulnerabilities of their own personal and professional experience. I hope there'll be an opportunity for me to go back and look at it again, because I don't think I could get it all with just one listening. As I close out, I'd like to share with you this one very simple poem that was written by the 19th century poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And it was actually sent to me by a friend just a few days ago. And when I got it, I thought, well, this is a very elegant but simple way to close out the program today. So bear with me as I repeat it. And Longfellow says, "Kind hearts are the gardens, kind words are the roots, kind thoughts are the flowers, kind deeds are the fruits. Take care of your garden and keep out the weeds. Fill it with sunshine, kind words, and kind deeds." So with that, I'll sign off and turn it over to Alexis Richburg. Thank you, Alexis.
Thank you, Doug, so much for moderating today's discussion. I mean, the comments from our panelists were so touching, so personal. Thank you for each of you for your partnership. I know, like Tracy said, we partner with you all on an annual basis. Many of you all host scouting programs, and we really appreciate our partnership. You know, now that we are in company of so many people and organizations that care about youth and truly care about our future, we would like to take this opportunity to give you all a little bit of a sneak peek at one of our upcoming events that we have going on October 8th, and that is our Youth Protection Seminar. So we would love to share with you this video here to invite you all to join us again virtually on October 8th for our Youth Protection Seminar. Enjoy the video. Thank you so much for your partnership. Thank you so much for caring about our youth, and we hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Get here, get here, get here. This is the 6th Youth Protection Seminar that they've had, and my first one. I feel like I've missed 5 of them, and I don't plan on missing any more. The information was so poignant, the information was so real and very candid.
Come together as a community to talk about youth protection in general in its many forms. So seeing the community come together, all of these different organizations, is a really great thing to see in these city of Atlanta. Nothing like this has ever happened before, so we're really excited to be a part of it.
Being able to know that we impact hundreds of thousands of kids in a positive way and hopefully make a difference that changes the lives. My favorite part of the Youth Protection Seminar is the ability that we have of reaching out to other youth-serving professionals.
The message is for those who have been abused to say that it's okay to speak out, and we're here to listen. There's a place for you. Just like our keynote speaker today said, you know, we're going to find our Grand Canyon. We're going to find our place of peace. This is necessary. It's mandatory. It's imperative for our children and for our society. We need these type of forums. We need these type of gatherings to get together to become incubators to support this at-risk youth.